What's up YouTube? I've got a sweet video for you today. I'm going to be showing you how I install high-end built-in cabinetry. This was a closet and I'm going to be turning it into a cool reading nook with a white oak bench in here. I'm going to be walking you through my process of installing it. I'll show you leveling the toe kick, installing the cabinet, scribing in the face frame with no filler strips, as well as the baseboard. And then the bench seat in here is going to be really cool. I'm going to show you how I make templates for tricky spaces. This is a really tricky one to get everything nice and tight. So stay tuned, follow the steps, and you can build some pretty sweet stuff. All right, so the bench that I built for this video is the second white oak bench that I've done for the same client. The first one I actually made a video on. If you want, you can go check that out. But in that video, I basically cover how it's built and constructed. This video is going to be strictly installation. And it's actually, even though it's a smaller bench, it's a more tricky installation since it's going in this closet. Now for this build and most of my builds, I use the Lamello Zeta P2 joiner. And I use the tenso connectors to connect my face frame to my box, my baseboard to my toe kick. What it does is it cuts these slots, which is basically a biscuit joiner slot, but then it vibrates at the end up and down and cuts this little groove in the back of the slot. Then you can slide in the connectors. There's a male and a female. They snap together with about 30 pounds of clamping pressure. It allows you to achieve a zero fastener look with invisible joinery. Very high-end result. Now honestly, you don't have to use this system. You can use biscuits and pocket screws, or if you're fine with seeing nails, you can just use nails. So here's the space where the built-in is going to be going. It's going to be very tricky, but I'll show you with some very simple systems how to achieve perfect results. The bench seat will go all the way to the wall, and back wall, side wall, and it'll also be tight on this side of the wall, and it'll wrap around, ending halfway in here. That I will make with a template to achieve perfect fit. The box is built a little bit narrower than the opening so that it can slide in, and then the gaps on the side of the box are filled in with my face frame. I've got a face frame that I build a little bit wider on each of the sides so that I can come in and scribe those end stiles and get a perfect fit. All right, so step one is getting the ladder style toe kick put in place. I build my toe kicks like this, separate from the box. It allows me to put it in, get it shimmed nice and level without having to hassle with the big box. So the first step is to shoot a level line. And you can do this at any height, it doesn't really matter. Basically what we're trying to do is find the highest point in the floor. Once we find the highest point in the floor, we will shim up all the low points to that level. So what we're doing is we're going around checking all the different spots, trying to find the lowest number. Now the lowest number is the distance between bottom of the tape and the laser line, which is then the highest point. So our highest point is this back left corner. It's out about a ½ inch compared to the front right. That stuff's to be expected when you're working in an old house or any home. Nothing's ever level or plumb. So now we are going to shim up the rest of this box to get it on that level. A very simple thing I do to get this up to level is I'll take a shim, put it at our highest point in the floor, which we know is the back left, and I'll put the shim right on the top of the toe kick, and using a Sharpie, I'll draw a line right on that laser. And that's our reference as we go around and check different parts of the toe kick. We want to shim everything up until that dark black line hits the green laser. So we've got it shimmed and sitting level. No matter where you put that, it's right on. So now I've already put in my blocks, and this is going to get screwed down to the floor and screwed to that back wall. So after you screw down the toe kick, you'll have these shims that stick out. On the smaller ones, you can just score them with a blade and snap them off. On the thicker ones, I like to use a multi-tool with a straight blade on there. Quick tip, I get my blades from Amazon. They're a lot cheaper that way and they last just as long. Another quick tip, always keep your site cleaned up. You know, I just cut those shims and I'm not gonna have a whole lot more cuts that I'm making in this space. So if I were to leave that sawdust there, it's just gonna be in my way for the rest of the install. All right, now it's time to bring the box in, but before we do that, I've got to put in these biscuits. Now I cut these slots in the top of the toe kick and the bottom of the box to align the two faces. Since I've got a face frame and a baseboard that's snapping on here, I need all those to be aligned nicely. All right, so got the box dropped on here. The biscuit slots help align that front side really nicely. We're sitting dead level in both directions. So now I'm going to screw this down to the toe kick. I pre-mark where those horizontals are so that I can screw down into them. And then I'll also screw to the back, hit a couple studs in there as well. So the main utilitarian part of this built-in is installed, screwed down to the base and the wall. Now it's time to beautify it, put on the face frame, start covering this thing in white oak. Now the top of this, you can see on the sides, that's too big of a span for 3/4 inch material, which is what our bench seat is. So I'll have to set my level on here, run it across, draw a level line in the same plane as this, and then attach a cleat to that wall and a cleat to this wall to support that corner. So if someone does sit on there, it doesn't bend at all. It's nice and solid. Both cleats are installed into the studs onto the face frame. So here is the face frame. Made this in the shop. I make all my face frames and drawers and doors at 1 inch thick instead of 3/4 inch. It's a much better result that way. So when fitting a face frame in between two walls, left and right, you want to get a super nice tight fit without any filler strips or caulking. And to do that, I build my face frames with extra wide stiles. These are 2.5 inches instead of 2 inches. And basically I have a 1/2 inch scribe to take off of each one. These are also field joints. So where this joint is glued and screwed with pocket screws, these end ones are just screwed in, they're not glued. So I can take these off, put them on there, get them scribed in nice and tight, reattach this, and this all snaps back together. So to make sure everything is accurate with my scribing, I first build the face frame to the box size, again with the extra wide stiles, and then I reference the box to the face frame and cut all my Lamello slots so that the face frame references off of the box. That gives me a point where my scribe is set. Now this is tricky to understand, so just keep following. So on this one, this inside face, when it's snapped in to these slots, is flush with the inside face here when it's snapped in. So then I will offset and cut additional slots 3/4 inch over so that I can remove these end stiles, unscrew them, come in here and put my either a tenso connector or a bisco connector, which is just a big biscuit just for alignment. And I'll put it into this slot so that it's sitting 3/4 inch this way on the box. Then you can scribe off 3/4 inch and then it'll bring it over, snap it right into place, and then it's aligned perfectly where these joints are going to go. And that's the case on both of these sides. It's a very easy way to scribe once you figure it out. And you can also use this with traditional biscuits. You don't have to use this with the Lamello system, but I would definitely recommend it. It's probably the best way to fit an inside scribe like this on both sides. If you don't have a biscuit joiner, you can also just make a template the same way I'll show you when I make my template for the bench top. So here is the right side stile. I'm going to start with this one. I've already removed it from the face frame. When we're done here, this inside slot will snap into this slot, and this inside face will be perfectly flush with this face. For doing the scribing, we'll be putting the biscuit in this slot, which is offset 3/4 of an inch, so that when we put it on here, we've got a 3/4 inch overlap that I will take my scribe off 3/4 of an inch, and then once I cut that, this will be sitting perfectly flush with this. So the first step is to set your scribe to the exact difference between these two slots. So we are going to put our biscos in this slot right here. These biscos are like big plastic biscuits. I just use them for aligning and scribing. So now we are going to put it right there, which has now offset this 3/4 of an inch, which is the exact distance of my scribe. So then I'll come and I'll scribe this wall and trace the line of the wall right onto the green tape here. So I've got both styles scribed here. These are pretty straight scribes, so we can leave the riving knife in place on this. I do freehand these on the table saw. I think the table saw works best for this kind of small scribe. But one thing I do like to do is put a back bevel on it, maybe about 5 to 10 degrees. That way we're cutting that front edge nice and tight right to the line, but we're cutting the back a little bit further, giving you a little bit more room to slide this thing in since it's going to be a pressure fit on both sides. So let's get this thing cut. So I put those biscos. So I've got the biscos sitting in the closest slot now, and that is a perfect fit. I mean, you can't get better than that. Super tight up against the wall, and we are sitting perfectly flush there. So this one is ready to be reassembled to the face frame. The face frame rails stop flush with this. So that's why aligning this to the box with the Lamellos, or if you're using biscuits, is just such a good way to do it. Super easy. And here's the left side fit. Absolutely perfect as well. I mean, you can't see a single gap along there. And then we're sitting perfectly flush here. This is my favorite part of built-in construction, a perfectly scribed in face frame using the Lamello Tenso connectors. Absolutely perfect fit. all the way around, probably even a little bit too tight. You can see why I back bevel that, so that I get a little gap behind there. But that looks so good. Here's the baseboard. I've got these slots cut in the back. I'm only going to use the top and the bottom. The middle one is for the offset scribe, just like the end stiles. So I'll use the biscos. I've got my tape, and I'll put that up 3/4 of an inch, scribe off 3/4, and the baseboard will snap on. All right, I just realized that my mic hadn't been plugged in all the way, so I apologize for the poor quality audio. Anyway, for this bench seat, I am using a white oak plywood instead of a solid hardwood. On the other bench that I built, I used a solid hardwood. I definitely do recommend that. If you can do that, definitely do it. But in this case, the bench is completely locked in on all 4 walls with the front face. So expansion and contraction could cause some serious issues down the road. That's why I went with plywood, and there will be a cushion on top of the plywood. I've already pre-finished the plywood and the nosing, and that is, I built that oversized so that we can take the template to the piece. Here's my crash course on template making. Here's what you'll need: a scribe, 1/4 inch plywood that I've ripped down into 3-inch wide strips, and the 2p10 glue. So I'll take these pieces of plywood and I'll go around the space, scribing them in 1 wall at a time, labeling them as I go, and then I will glue them together with the 2p10. That stuff dries really quick, works really well. And once I've got the template fitting perfectly in the space, exactly to the space, then I'll transfer the template directly onto the bench seat material and cut it out. This gives me a very clean, tight fit without having to do any measuring. You can measure, it is possible, but you're always going to get little gaps, especially since the walls are wavy. You're not going to get it perfect. So this is the best way to get it fitting exactly. This works for bench top seats, countertops, or even stair treads. You can use it for all sorts of things once you understand the basics of it. All right, so let's start with this back piece. The first thing I do is cut these pieces to length so they're a little bit shorter than the length of the wall that I'm trying to scribe. That way I can get them fit in here. Then we'll look at the wall. So this wall is actually sitting really straight. Usually you're going to see a lot more curves in a wall. I know the side ones have a lot more curves, but this one's pretty good. We've got a slight gap around here, maybe 1/8 of an inch, and then a little bit in that corner. So we still do want to scribe this so that we can get rid of that. So what you'll do is you'll set your scribe, and since these are 3 inches wide, it doesn't really matter the amount that you take off. It's just you want to take off more than this gap. You want to set your scribe for a little bit more than what the gap is. So we'll set it for, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch, and then we'll scribe this wall and go cut that on the table saw. Sometimes you'll get lucky with a straight wall. Here's my right side. I've got a notch here around the casing just so I can get this side fitting perfect. But I put this on there and it was sitting really good, very straight wall. All I had to do was just take a little file to these corners here. Usually at these inside corners you'll get a bit of drywall mud that kind of bends that a little bit. So almost always you're going to have a little gap in the middle on these type of walls. This one really wasn't bad. I just took the file to it and saved me a trip down to the table saw for this piece. More often than not, you're going to see this. This is the left side, and you can see just how far out this one is. It's sitting at about 1/4 of an inch gap in the middle, and that drywall mud is caked on there on both sides. So if you were to just measure out this space and cut your bench top to the measurements you got, you'd be left with a bunch of gaps like that. that you'd have to come in and fill with caulking. So definitely this piece needs to be scribed in so that our bench top curves around that wall. So here's a fun one. This is going to be my front piece that I need to scribe around this casing on both sides. Tight to the wall back there. And then I need this to land somewhere in here, and then I'll run another little piece of plywood this way for that front section. So I got all the pieces scribed. As you can see, it's fitting much better along that back wall, along with the left side. Got this notched around the front. I cut this one in half so that I could get these as tight as I can, and then I'll glue on this little piece here to hold them together. But that's nice and tight around there. So you kind of just piece these one by one, get them fitting as nice as you can, and then once they're fitting perfect, glue it together. We're just mapping out the space. So here's the finished template. I put these middle supports in to hold it from any movement this way. Everything's super tight. Very pleased with it. I do think it's going to be a challenge to get the top in here since I'm going to be cutting this so tight, but I think it can be done. So one very important thing is this reference line right here shows where the front of this face frame is. You want to do that on both sides, and that's what we are going to reference all of our cutting on the actual bench top when we transfer this template over. So I ran into one issue. I had to remove the notch that goes behind the casing on both sides. That was keeping me from being able to take the template out. And if I can't get the template out, I definitely can't get the piece in. So what I'm going to do, now that I've cut that back, the template's going in and out very easily, and I shouldn't have any issue with the actual piece. And then what I'll do is I'll make a little mini piece that will come and sit in here. I need to add a little bit of blocking under here, but then almost like a filler strip that will patch these two little holes. But I'll still cut out the piece according to this template. So here is the template piece that I will use on the bench top, and I'll cut a little piece off of the plywood to match this, and I will also do it right next to where this is, so that the grain is continuous and so that hides that seam. So I've transferred the template over to the piece. As you can see, I've pre-finished this and left it oversized. I've got a nosing on here from solid hardwood, and that overlaps the bottom just a touch. So since this will be sitting on that box, I want it to slide up and pretty much touch the face frame underneath here. Pretty close, but I do need a little bit of overhang. So we're going to put these reference lines right behind that, maybe even 1/8 of an inch on both sides. And this is held in right now with the tenso connectors so that I can pop it off, get this thing in there, and then snap it back on. I've also pre-taped underneath the template, and then I'm going to mark this with a pencil. You could also use a knife if you want, and cut the tape. And then you can see too, I've got my little filler pieces. I'm going to wait to mark those until this is cut. That way I don't lose the kerf of the blade in the grain, if that makes sense. You'll see what I mean, but I'm first going to cut it, and then I'm going to take this piece to this little section and cut that out. Same with this side, and then I will have my little fillers once the bench top slides in place. One more thing is I'm going to use the 2P10 glue to glue the template down to the tape. That way when I mark this out, it doesn't go anywhere. So this is held on with the tenso connectors. I've got my line there. I'm going to cut this on the miter saw on both sides to that angle. So what I like to do is a back bevel, but you have to be careful that you don't back bevel right to the line since this is going to be such a tight fit. If you do, it'll leave a really brittle top edge that could tear out as you're trying to fit this bench top. So I put a big back bevel, but stay away from the line, and then I'll come back with a 90-degree cut and flush up right to the line so that it has maybe a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch of solid material so that it doesn't chip out. So after I made this cut with the kerf, then I lay out my template. If I were to lay out my template first, we would have that kerf missing from the template. So then I marked that. Now I can cut that piece. This will slide over and the grain will be really close to matching. Got it all cut out. Got my little filler pieces cut. The grain should be perfect underneath that tape. I'm going to leave the tape on, put this guy in place. Any little gaps, since we've got the tape on there, we can fill with a little bit of caulk. Shouldn't need much. Should be pretty tight fit. Let's go check it out. So this is an absolute perfect fit. Super tight all the way around, but was able to get it in without damaging anything. I think this is the only little gap there, not even 1 millimeter. So I'll fill that little piece with caulk, and that doesn't even need it. I guess that's it. That little piece, we'll screw this thing in from the bottom side, peel off the tape, snap on the front nosing, and it's a wrap. So when attaching a bench top or countertop, I always screw it in from underneath with this little cabinet screw. Now if this was solid hardwood, I would oval out the holes so that this has room to expand and contract. But since it's plywood, we can just screw it in. All right, you ready for the big reveal? Absolutely perfect. Don't even know that it's a patch. All right, guys, I put the drawer fronts in the openings. I'm still waiting on the drawer boxes to come, but I wanted to see what it looks like. Could not be happier with this Scribe. I mean, all the way around, it is a seamless fit. This is the results you'll get when you learn how to scribe in with a template. Once you learn the basics, it'll go pretty smooth. And then the offset trick for the face frame. Everything is so tight. Very pleased with how this turned out. So please leave me a comment if you guys have any questions on the process. But I think I covered everything. I mean, this is one of the more complicated templates I've had to build. So once you get learning the basics of template making, most things will be pretty simple. You can do shelves, countertop, benches like this, and get perfect results. I mean, that just looks like it grew into the wall. It looks like the built-in was here first and everything else was built around it. All right, guys, well, thank you so much for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a thing or two. It was super fun for me to put this together. I don't really cover install too much, but there was plenty of really good tips and tricks in the video. So once you learn the basics of how to do it, something as tricky as this can become pretty simple. So I always try to build things to last. The way I built this, solid wood, inch-thick face frames, good joinery, should be here for quite a while. So thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, and have a great day.